I've never really felt the need to go and party, and certainly going to Jeffrey's was not about partying. Absolutely not.
Beyond the stage smiles and public bows, a former maid is now painting a picture of Prince Andrew that no palace PR team could ever erase. Her story pulls back the velvet curtains, exposing petty cruelties, private habits, and an entitlement that became second nature over the years. And in 2010, there was certainly no party to celebrate his release in December. Not at all. Today we're piecing together the testimony, the little moments that betray a much larger truth about power, revealing private humiliations, quiet commands and favours that were bought with silence. Prince Andrew is now demanding a jury trial and has formally denied every allegation made against him in a New York courtroom. This is his official answer to sexual assault claims, and it begs the question: what happens when servants talk and the royal facade finally cracks? Let's get to the unvarnished truth about the valet who knew too much. Long before the scandals hit the headlines, a quieter drama was unfolding inside the royal estate. It was a story told in hushed tones among those serving the royals daily. Most people outside the palace walls picture the staff as flawless, loyal professionals gliding through marble halls with perfect poise. But the reality was so much messier, especially for anyone assigned to work directly with Prince Andrew. They felt that tension more than anyone else, and many held a secret resentment they didn't dare speak aloud. One of those secret voices belonged to a man named Paul, Prince Andrew's own personal valet. He'd served the prince for decades, residing in an apartment that was directly connected to Andrew's private chambers. For all those years he packed Andrew's suitcases, organised his possessions, and jumped at his every command. But behind all the royal formality, Paul was living a totally different reality. According to people who knew him, he truly hated his job. It wasn't the long hours that bothered him, it was the prince's conduct. What really made things worse were the small, almost bizarre requests the prince would often make. Andrew had a Jack Russell Terrier called Bendix. A strange name, sure, but even stranger was Andrew's habit of waking his valet in the dead of night if the dog made a sound. At 2 or 3 in the morning, Andrew would hit a private buzzer or call a direct line that would summon Paul immediately. Paul would then have to rush in, still half asleep, take the dog outside and just wait in the freezing cold, smoking a cigarette to stay awake. These bizarre demands became nightly rituals that left him completely exhausted and deeply resentful. Sometimes, while patrolling the gardens, palace security guards would run into Paul, who used those late-night moments to complain. He told them bluntly that he despised the prince. His words were incredibly sharp, full of the kind of frustration that only builds up after years of mistreatment. He described Andrew as rude, incredibly demanding and cruel in ways that stunned even those used to royal entitlement. At one point, Paul made a dark joke that he was hoping the prince's ski trip would end with Andrew flying right off a cliff. That's how deep the bitterness ran, and that resentment wasn't just coming from him. Many insiders thought Andrew had gotten away with his terrible behaviour for far too long. Some even said if Prince Philip had stepped in earlier, maybe even put a bar of soap in his mouth the first time Andrew swore at a staff member, things might have been different. Instead, Andrew grew up with absolutely no consequences, treated like a man who could do no wrong. Staff openly claimed he was the Queen's favourite child, a prince totally shielded from criticism in a world where your rank decided everything. You see, the palace wasn't a normal place to work. It was a tiny kingdom inside a kingdom, and staff was split into 3 canteens. One was for senior officials, complete with French menus and white glove service. Another was for office workers, and the last was for the lowest ranks, the maids and footmen using microwaves and kettles. Even in the staff corridors, everyone moved with a silent knowledge of their place in this strict social order. Many who started young would stay for their entire lives. The royal household was their world, their family, their whole identity. Loyalty wasn't just recommended, it was practically built into the architecture. And that loyalty had a dangerous side. It meant that no matter how badly Andrew behaved, nobody was ever going to say a word. Not the footman, not his valet, not even the royal protection officers who went with him everywhere. They weren't his friends, they were staff. Their job was to protect him, not to question him. And that leads us to a much darker question one insiders whispered only after it all fell apart. If this is how Prince Andrew acted inside the palace walls, what on earth happened when nobody was looking? Don't go anywhere, because what's coming next reveals a different kind of shadow, the silence that kept him safe. The further you get inside the royal household, the more you realise that power doesn't just shape behaviour, it actively protects it. By the time Prince Andrew was a full-grown adult, his entire world was designed so that every mistake, every bad decision and every nasty comment just disappeared. People saw it, they whispered about it, but no one ever challenged him. And it's this culture of total silence that would later spark horrifying questions about the prince's private life beyond the palace gates. The officers assigned to protect him described their job simply duty without any judgment involved. They were his silent shadows, always present, but they never ever interfered. You'd think it would be impossible for these officers not to know every single detail of Andrew's private affairs. But those on the inside understood the reality. Your protection officer isn't your best friend, no matter how casual the chat or how warm the smiles are. They were staff, plain and simple. They weren't following him into private rooms. And they never questioned where he went or why. Their job was simple: keep him physically safe, not morally accountable. But even from their professional distance, they started noticing clues, little hints that something was seriously wrong. Strange travel plans, unsettling company, sudden shifts in his daily routine. Back then, none of it connected. But now looking back, some officers believe they were probably witnessing the first signs of a much, much darker story. Inside the palace, the loyalty of the staff was like a shield. It didn't just protect reputations, it protected bad habits. A maid might see something odd, but she'd never dare report it. A footman could overhear a really unsettling conversation, but he would keep quiet because he was terrified of losing the only life he'd ever known. Many of the senior officials were former military officers, who saw discipline as loyalty first and asking questions second. And towering over them all was Andrew, shielded by his title, his bloodline, and a queen who absolutely adored him. But even inside this incredibly controlled world, the cracks were starting to show. He was often described as childish, completely entitled, and refusing to take any responsibility. Take his infamous teddy bear incident, where he demanded his staff arrange dozens of stuffed animals in a precise order each day. It was just one example of a man who never grew up. To many he came across less like a respected royal figure, and much more like a person who was emotionally stuck in childhood. And when you give someone with that mindset unlimited power, the results can be seriously disturbing. Inside the palace, the staff would often whisper, who could possibly ever stop him? Discipline was weak, any criticism was shut down, and consequences simply didn't exist. The staff who served him the longest were usually the most cynical, openly admitting he was the one royal who always caused trouble. Even when compared to his own siblings, his behaviour was shocking, leaving everyone wondering how he kept getting away with it all. But this toxic culture of silence wouldn't stay behind the palace walls forever. Eventually that secrecy spilled out into the real world, particularly when Andrew started making connections way outside of England. And that's when the whispers began to morph into real fear and private worries exploded into public scandals. That's when the prince could no longer hide behind the silent loyalty of a staff that had once protected him from everything, even from himself. If you think that's shocking, just wait until you hear what another staff member revealed about him. This is Prince Andrew completely unmasked. For Charlotte Briggs, serving the royal family was supposed to be the greatest honour of her entire life. She pictured a world of loyalty and character where kindness and mutual respect were everything. But nothing could have prepared her for the reality she faced when she was only 21 years old. What she thought was going to be a perfect, polished dream quickly became the job that no one on staff wanted, a position in a palace where everything on the surface sparkled. But what happened behind closed doors was a different story. Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, was nothing like the charming public figure that the world had once applauded so loudly. Behind the palace's high gates and perfectly clean hallways, Those who knew him best described him as rude, explosive, and shockingly entitled. And Charlotte, who had walked into his world hoping to serve with genuine pride, was immediately confronted by a man with a temper so bad the smallest mistake could unleash an absolute firestorm. Years later, when she finally decided to speak out, she wasn't trying to be polite or gentle with her words at all. Her interview was sharp, brutally honest, and fueled by all the experiences she could no longer keep silent about. She said bluntly that she didn't care about Andrew's feelings. She called him horrible, nasty, and a man who had made her cry more times than she could even remember. And as her story went public, the world received a very rare glimpse of the Duke as his own staff actually knew him. This wasn't the smiling royal you see on the balcony. This was the impossible-to-please boss who treated his own staff like they were just props. Her first memories of him were of a man who seemed to believe the world existed only to serve him. He would demand people do simple tasks he could have easily done himself, as if lifting a finger was somehow beneath him. And curtains became one of his biggest obsessions. Not their colour, not their fabric, but a tiny little gap that Charlotte had once left between them. It was a difference so small it was almost invisible, and yet it was enough to unleash one of his famous explosive outbursts. On that particular day, he stormed out of his office, marched right down the hall, and just screamed at her using language totally unbecoming of a prince. His voice boomed through the hallways. Staff members froze. Charlotte started crying, and everyone got a chilling reminder that in Prince Andrew's world, even perfection wasn't good enough. But the strangest part wasn't even his explosive anger. It was his bizarre demands. They were peculiar rituals, almost childish, but he enforced them with military-like severity. Take his infamous collection of stuffed animals, 72 teddy bears, a hippo, and a black panther, all had to be arranged with exact precision. Laminated instruction sheets laid out their positions, just like a battlefield map. Charlotte even received full training on how to handle the stuffed toys like she was preparing for palace security, not placing soft toys on a bed. His bedroom was just as demanding. Pillows needed centering to the millimetre. Pyjamas had to be perfectly folded and aligned. The bears were displayed during the day, taken away at night, and then put back at sunrise. Staff whispered, wondering what kind of grown man needed these rituals just to function. But for Charlotte it wasn't funny. It was completely exhausting. Every day felt like she was walking on broken glass. One tiny mistake and his temper would just explode all over again. Other servants confirmed the exact same pattern. Andrew barking orders, just asserting his dominance. He expected total worship without offering any courtesy back, and belittled staff only to remind them of their place. Unlike his siblings, Andrew carried no heavy royal burden. He was never going to be king. He wasn't drowning in responsibilities. Yet he acted like a tyrant, ruling over his terrified subjects. Charlotte's story wasn't really about his tantrums or the teddy bears. It was about a man who seemed to enjoy breaking people, who created a work environment so toxic that even a palace felt like a prison. And this was only the start of it. Actually, no, this wasn't really the beginning. There was something about Andrew that even Charlotte was already aware of. So let's explore the making of this prince and Andrew's shockingly cruel childhood. From the time he could walk, people inside the palace whispered that something about young Andrew felt off. Not mischievous or curious, but just strangely unkind. While Charles would bury himself in books and Anne met every challenge with sheer grit, Andrew moved through the royal hallways like someone who was convinced the world already belonged to him. The staff noticed it first in all the smallest moments. The way he would snap for attention, the way he treated every single room as his personal stage, and every person as someone to command, tease, or break, depending on his mood. Even as a toddler, it seemed he was drawn to cruelty the way other kids are drawn to toys. Instead of giggling shyly near the Queen's guards, he would strut before them, pulling faces and mocking their famously stiff posture. When they stood perfectly still as their duty required, he didn't get bored. He actually grew furious. He would push harder, trying to force them into a reaction so he could feel triumphant. It was the first real sign of a pattern that would follow him for decades. If he couldn't earn their admiration, he would simply settle for complete domination. But it wasn't only people who suffered under his temper. Animals too became the targets of his deep irritation and his utter boredom. He would kick the family dogs if they didn't move fast enough and laugh when they yelped. He even hit horses' legs with sticks just to watch them flinch. The groom's normally silent and incredibly patient men finally reached their breaking point. One day after he had struck a horse one too many times, they dragged him over to a manure pile and buried him in it head first. Harsh, shocking, and unforgettable. But for them it was the only language they believed he could actually understand. And yet even that wasn't the worst part of it. His bullying stretched into every single corner of his young life. His younger brother Edward became one of his favourite victims, enduring shoves, slaps, stolen desserts and bruises that nobody dared to question out loud. This wasn't the rough and tumble play of siblings. These were contests that Andrew absolutely had to win. Moments he used to prove his power over someone smaller and more gentle than he was. And the palace staff, they bore the brunt of it all every day. One particular footman suffered so much taunting that he finally snapped and landed a punch that left the young prince with a very visible black eye. When he went to the Queen expecting to be dismissed, she completely shocked him. She actually refused his resignation. Even she appeared to understand that Andrew had finally pushed things too far, that her son's behaviour had twisted into something far beyond mere childish mischief. School did absolutely nothing to soften him. At his prep school and later at Gordonstown, his classmates gave him cruel nicknames, not because they were jealous, but out of pure fear and frustration. He was known for his tantrums, his sneers, and a laugh that always came at someone else's expense. His teachers would describe him as smug, entitled, and utterly impossible to discipline, and as he grew older the behaviour didn't fade, it only sharpened. Stories circulated about him tugging at the clothes of female staff members during palace events, or of him smearing food on their faces and barking vulgar orders at servants, like they existed only for his personal amusement. On camping trips, he would demolish other kids' shelters, hurl their possessions into rivers, and then watch their suffering as if it were a show. The people who worked closest with him summed it up with one devastating sentence: he wasn't raised to be a prince. He behaved like a miniature tyrant, throwing things on the floor, swearing at staff, and barking commands instead of speaking to people. His entire world seemed to operate on the belief that everyone else existed only to serve him. And yet, as disturbing as these stories are, they bring up an even bigger question. Because when we move from Andrew's early antics to the men who served alongside him, the picture gets far clearer. So what truly separates Andrew from other working royals? Let's compare his behaviour with other royal officers, and you'll see why his conduct stands out as being so much worse. Stay with us. A royal contrast: Prince Andrew versus his siblings. In the complicated world of the British royal household, not all royals are treated equally by the very people who serve them. Former staff members consistently draw sharp contrasts between Prince Andrew and his family, describing a level of entitlement and immaturity that made him especially difficult to work for, while other members of the royal family earned both respect and loyalty through their fairness and basic decency. Andrew's behaviour, by contrast, reportedly sparked tension and frustration at every single turn. Take Prince Charles, for example. He was remembered by palace staff as being consistently polite, patient, and respectful of the people working for him. They say he always took time to acknowledge their efforts. Sometimes he would stop for a quick chat in the hallways or while on the lawns, offering just a few simple words of appreciation. Even when he required long hours or extremely high standards, his tone was always professional, never insulting. Staff usually left their duties feeling valued, not belittled. These gestures might seem like small things, but inside the rigid palace hierarchy they meant absolutely everything. They created a culture of dignity and mutual respect that trickled down from the very top. In a similar vein, Prince Edward built a reputation as approachable and considerate. Staff members have recalled that they felt genuinely at ease around him, noting that he rarely demanded pointless tasks or acted on a bizarre impulse. He maintained standards appropriate for his royal status, but avoided the strange late-night commands that had reportedly become Andrew's signature. While Andrew's valet might be woken in the middle of the night to walk a dog or run other odd errands, staff who worked with Edward could count on a predictable fair workload. These differences, though they might seem subtle, show a major distinction in leadership styles and personal character among the royals. Princess Anne, known for her incredible work ethic, also won the deep admiration of her staff. Her household reportedly ran with military precision, but she always treated employees as partners in her service, not as objects for her own amusement. Former staff often call her professional yet personable, someone who earned loyalty through her own competence, rather than by using fear or showing favoritism. Even with her demanding schedule, Anne's fairness let her staff take pride in their work instead of feeling anxious about her unpredictable moods. By contrast, Prince Andrew reportedly left his staff exhausted, frustrated, and deeply humiliated. Former maids and valets have described his bizarre and childish demands, like the notorious teddy bear arrangements, or being called at 2 a.m. for pointless tasks, as a source of constant stress. One former maid said working for Andrew was the only bad experience of her royal career, explaining that he always managed to ruin the entire atmosphere. Unlike his brothers and his sister, Andrew's behaviour seemed to come from a deep-seated entitlement fuelled by a lifetime of privilege, his status as the Queen's favourite, and a total lack of boundaries growing up. This comparison shows that the palace system itself wasn't necessarily a cruel or oppressive workplace. Many other royals treated staff with respect even within that very rigid hierarchy. It was Andrew's personal attitude and upbringing that fostered a uniquely toxic environment. While palace life always demanded obedience and discretion, it also allowed for fair treatment and mutual respect, as seen from the experiences of those who were serving other family members. Ultimately, these contrasts paint a picture not just of Andrew as a person, but of the larger dynamics inside the royal household. It shows privilege can indeed coexist with responsibility. They show that entitlement can be balanced with respect, and that real leadership in the family is defined more by personal behaviour than by a title. When you place Andrew's behaviour next to the more considerate approach of his relatives, it proves that the problem was never palace life itself. It was about the choices and the character of the prince in the spotlight. But it wasn't just the domestic staff. So, what other allegations have surfaced because of his deeply troubling behaviour? But just how far does this disturbing conduct really go? Stick around as we reveal the untold stories and the shocking allegations that shook Prince Andrew to his core. From the very beginning, the stories swirling around Prince Andrew escaped far beyond the palace corridors, while the initial tales centred on his staff. Valets, maids and footmen who endured his tantrums, his relentless demands and his cruel whims. A much darker narrative was taking shape. A far more serious story loomed in the shadows. Soon allegations of sexual misconduct and abuse would capture the world's attention. They revealed a deeply troubling pattern of a man wrapped in immense privilege and wielding unchecked power, enabled by the silent obedience of everyone around him. Central to these grave claims is Virginia Giuffre, who bravely accused Andrew of sexual abuse when she was still a minor. In her own accounts and interviews, she gave detailed descriptions of being coerced into encounters with the prince, including at the homes of his notorious associates. These allegations triggered civil lawsuits and relentless public scrutiny, despite Andrew's blanket denials of any wrongdoing. However, the persistence of these claims shines a light on a very troubling reality. His status, his wealth, and his connections created opportunities for him that no one else could access, while shielding him from accountability at every single turn. What connects these grave allegations to the daily experiences of palace staff is one recurring theme: power combined with total protection always breeds impunity. The staff were often expected to silently suffer through Andrew's childish or cruel behaviour, knowing that questioning a senior royal could easily threaten their positions or reputations. His valets, his maids, and even his protection officers were all trained to obey, not to challenge. Loyalty was absolutely mandatory, and the fear of reprisal simply kept many of them silent. The very system that shielded him from accountability inside the palace was mirrored by the power structures outside, allowing his awful behaviour to go unchecked for years. Even the minor grievances from staff illustrate this perfectly. This pattern of ordering staff to arrange his teddy bears, perfectly waking his valets at all hours, or cruelly mocking those who disappointed him. These acts might seem trivial on the surface, but when you see them alongside the severe allegations, a disturbing and consistent pattern emerges. It's the personality of a man accustomed to acting without consequence. His whims and desires could simply override the comfort, safety, and basic rights of anyone in his circle. The palace's golden walls concealed not just privilege, but a system that enabled this wrongdoing to continue completely unchallenged. Staff testimonies and the public allegations, when taken together, reveal a man totally insulated by hierarchy whose behaviour consistently exploited the huge gap between his authority and any real accountability. These domestic stories from staff, while not criminal in themselves, show the very early signs of a mindset where sheer entitlement completely eclipsed empathy, and where his status always outweighed morality. When these very same patterns expanded out into high society, the consequences became so much more serious, with silence protection and social influence masking the harm from public view. By connecting the domestic staff's grievances with the wider misconduct claims, a very clear and disturbing picture emerges. Prince Andrew's behaviour wasn't just isolated, impulsive, or somehow misunderstood. It was carefully nurtured in a toxic culture of unquestioning loyalty, fear, and institutional protection. Every single demand, every prank, and every cruel gesture inside the palace mirrors the exact same dynamic that allowed much greater misdeeds to happen beyond its walls. So just how did this mixture of loyalty and fear, and all those layers of protection, transform Andrew from a spoiled royal into someone completely emboldened by impunity? Stay tuned as we unravel this complex web and show how the palace cultivated Andrew's entitlement. Inside the royal household, loyalty is so much more than a simple virtue. It is an unspoken law, a binding force that quietly shapes every single interaction and every decision. For many of the palace staff, their lives became completely inseparable from their service. Young recruits often started out in their late teens, dedicating entire decades of their lives to the household. Their work, their very identity, and all of their financial stability were intertwined so tightly that leaving or even questioning things, or even hinting at being uncomfortable, could risk everything they had spent their lives building. The palace was not just another workplace. It was their entire world, and inside it, loyalty was the very currency that kept them going. Insiders have described this world as being ruled by both fierce loyalty and constant fear. The staff were trained not only to serve, but to truly understand their place. It was a subtle and sometimes very explicit reminder that they existed to uphold the royals' authority, not to form their own friendships or alliances. To challenge a royal's behaviour or to report any kind of misconduct, or even just expressing frustration, felt almost unimaginable. The unspoken rule was always clear: obey, endure, and preserve the household's public image at all costs. Any kind of disobedience could result in embarrassment, dismissal, or something much worse. Financial dependence only magnified this intense control. Many staff had climbed up from low-ranking positions to trusted household roles over a period of decades. Leaving for them meant losing not only a paycheck, but also their housing, their pensions, and their entire social network. They'd also lose a sense of purpose tied to their royal service. Even tiny errors could draw harsh criticism from the royals, reinforcing that silence was almost always the safest path. The steady paycheck and perks of palace life were like golden handcuffs keeping staff in line, long after any real loyalty had disappeared. And on top of that, the institution itself protected them. The palace's strict hierarchy, rigid protocols, and loyal senior staff created a wall of silence that shielded the family from everything. Security guards, top administrators, and even the most veteran household members all worked to maintain order and guard the royals' image, making speaking out feel completely hopeless. Bad behaviour was allowed to fester behind closed doors because the system was built to protect the family's reputation above all else. This mix of loyalty fear and institutional cover-ups pretty much guaranteed that nobody would ever talk. Even the most disturbing behaviour could continue for years, completely unchallenged, forcing staff to suffer the abuse alone and in silence. Obedience wasn't just a rule, it was a survival strategy. Questioning authority meant risking absolute personal and professional destruction. Staff saw it all up close, the misconduct, the cruelty, and the shocking entitlement, and yet their voices were just whispers behind closed doors, inside this tightly controlled world. The royal household was shielded from any real scrutiny, while the staff were trapped between their duty and what was right. Every single act of loyalty just kept the cycle going, building a system where power had no limits and privilege always won. Prince Andrew's true colours have finally been revealed to the world. So you have to wonder, what other secrets is he hiding behind those royal doors? We want to hear what you really think down in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe.